and to Newswatch. An incredible example of media hypocrisy also shows you how easily the mainstream media can be bought. For years, I have heard global warming activists scream that the news on global warming is being twisted because big oil and big coal and big fossil fuels have somehow slipped cash to the media or bought off or wined and dined some journalists and, they're all biased now. Not that I've ever seen any proof of that. But I have now seen something very similar from the other side. Associated Press is one of the world's biggest news agencies. They write news copy that then magazines and newspapers slip into their own covers and, it's got AP on the bottom if you ever want to know. It openly boasts that it is now being bribed by Big Green. It has accepted $8 million from left-wing charities, including one backed by James Murdoch, to publish global warming scares. Here's the head of this new climate unit of Associated Press making that very clear that this is funding to spread global warming panic.
We want to focus on the places that are being most impacted, but we also want to focus on policy, changes to laws that can make a big difference when it comes to emissions.
So watch out for any global warming news in the papers or magazines that come with that little tag on the end, AP or Associated Press. Don't trust it, because it's now an official mouthpiece of alarmists. Joining me is Jack Houghton, digital editor here on Sky News and host of The Media Show on Sky on Fridays at 8 p.m. Jack, the most astonishing thing about this story is that Associated Press seems to be boasting. It's glad, it's not ashamed at all, at announcing that it is selling its soul for money to Green Crusaders.
Oh, I absolutely love this story. It's sponsored content. It has no other name except it is sponsored content. And in the announcement that the Associated Press actually gave in their news story about why this was so amazing, they actually had the audacity to have a few lines in there about how journalists historically were very wary of taking money from philanthropists because of it would be seen to erode their independence. However, now the news media is financially struggling so much that journalists now welcome this. A couple of points on this. Journalists should not be looking at content from a point of advocacy. Now, small newsrooms often do. I admire when local journalists at the community newspaper campaign for, their roundabout crossings or various things that the community wants. But when you're looking at a large organisation covering, macro economics, very intricate science discussions, the complexities behind it, you want to approach those issues from a point of neutrality. You don't want to approach them from the point where, by their own admission, there's 50 journalists now across this organisation which are employed directly through these funds. It's become an industry. There's now vested interests. It's bad journalism when your journalists' very jobs depend on this kind of these stories being sold in a very specific way.
I find it ironic, James Murdoch, who's the son of Rupert Murdoch, younger son, was complaining about the bias of his father's publications in outlets particularly like us. And then they go and actually pay for bias of their own. I find this just absolutely extraordinary. I guess the only excuse is, Jack, that these journalists would say they don't need to be paid to be as biased as they are. They're just biased normally. They just need someone to, keep them in the style to which they become accustomed. That's all.
Yeah, definitely. And look, the thing about this issue is they probably don't see themselves as being biased. They see themselves as being advocates, and they wouldn't like the word activists. I would call them activists. I think when money is coming from organisations which they want to shift global policies, that becomes an act of activism. But my point would be that all issues relating to science and particularly climate change, there is a degree of complexity in them which eliminates this two-tiered, this kind of univariate discussion on it. Either you do this one thing, you completely eliminate this particular energy source, you completely shut down, coal mines, or you do none of it, and then that's the alternative. There are lots of different things you can do, and we deserve to be able to have a discussion. And you don't need specifically to be coming at it from a point of climate science to have that more economic discussion, because there is a fallout of spending a ridiculous amount of money on something where the return is negligible. And I'd probably make that point in Australia's case, where we do have very little impact from a global emissions point. When I was looking at the Associated Press's coverage of China, and they were applauding China, which brings out 14,000 megatons of CO2, just churns it into the air, and they were praising them for promising to have 2060 net zero target. Absurd. The protection that is happening for China is crazy, and they have no credibility in the argument until they start addressing the biggest polluter in the world.
Jack, still sticking on this theme a little bit, ABC boss David Anderson, well, he and his staff, they don't need to get paid to promote global warming scares. They'll do them naturally. They do it non-stop for free. But Anderson has written a new book in defence of the ABC, again claiming, what a joke, that it's not biased. How he says that, I don't know. And it has this line from David Anderson. He says, the ABC will give more weight to the informed view of leading scientists working in the field than to those with no scientific knowledge but vested interests in fossil fuel extraction. Now, my first question to you is, why that dichotomy that it's going to prefer the informed view of leading scientists against know-nothings paid off by fossil fuel interests? What about know-nothings who are part of the green industry or paid off by green philanthropists like we see in AP, or people who just know nothing but happen to be named Greta Thunberg?
There is this misconception out there which proliferates through the media, which I find completely bizarre and very ignorant, that there is no industry in renewables, that the only amount of corporate money that would influence the debate must come from big evil coal companies. Well, a lot of these people probably haven't had a look at what BHP is doing to transition towards renewables. A lot of them probably haven't looked at what most traditional fossil fuel companies are doing. There is a lot of money to be made by, Tesla, companies that are transitioning to electric cars, the bid for subsidies out there. There is money to be made by companies that are clever. And if you are to brainlessly go into the debate one-sided and prop up one particular side of the corporate sector at the expense of the other, it is just completely dishonest. But I welcome David Anderson's pledge, because I hope that means, Andrew, that we're not going to see Greta Thunberg and all these other eco-activists that have absolute zero credibility, zero qualifications. I hope they are completely eliminated from the argument, because if what he is saying is to be believed, we should only be interviewing qualified people. The one caveat on that is I do think the ABC does eliminate the economic discussion from this debate. So it's one thing to say, this will help us from a scientific perspective by reducing emissions, but the real question is, to what degree will that help? What degree will that actually end up changing things over a long period, a 50-year period, and how much will it cost? And then what is the negative impact of that? Power prices, families doing it very tough, who are having to make very tough decisions about what energy sources to have in the middle of summer and whether to have air conditioning on because the energy bills just get so out of control. Those are very real discussions, and you shouldn't be slandered or demonized for bringing up those issues. If the ABC does avoid the economic side, well, come to Sky News, particularly skynews.com.au, because we will cover all sides of the debate.
Just for one tone example, we've actually got fewer cyclones. How about that? How do you explain that, David Armstrong? Anyway, Jack Houghton, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.